All right, let's go ahead and start digging into how our Stacks application is actually put together. So you can see here that I am running our DevNet in our Hero platform. And after you run this up, it'll take just a couple minutes, but once you get to, usually happens at about block 25 for me, you'll see your contracts being deployed here. And so basically what we have now is within the Hero platform, we've got a localized version of the Stacks blockchain running so that we can go ahead and test it and interact with it. And I am using a tool by Google called Anti-Gravity, which is an AI-powered IDE, and so that's what we're going to be using for today. But what I want to do for this video in this section of the tutorial is I want to just go through and sort of give you an overview of what a Stacks application is actually composed of, and then kind of walk you through where each of those things are in the docs, really with the goal being to familiarize yourself with all the different building blocks of a Stacks application. And so right here, I just have this CrowdForge project open. Remember, this is the project that we pulled from that platform template. And so I haven't done anything to this project yet. This is just the default template that we pulled down. I just have the README open right here. And where I'm going to start first is this Clarity folder. So the two folders that you'll want to pay attention to here in this template are Clarity and Frontend. Frontend's pretty self-explanatory. This is just going to be a Next application that's going to control the front end of our app. We'll go through that in a second. But then Clarity, this is all Stack-specific stuff. And what this is using behind the scenes, this Clarity folder is using what's called Clarinet. So if we go to our docs, the docs.stacks.co, you can see here we've got this build section. And this build section is where you're going to spend a lot of your time as a developer, because this is where a lot of the guides and content are going to be for how to use the different developer tools. So if we scroll down here, you'll see this one called Learn Clarinet. We'll click on Overview for that. And Clarinet is basically the tool that we're going to be using to write and interact with our Clarity smart contracts. And so if you're familiar with Web3 development on something like Ethereum, you might be familiar with a tool like Hardhat or Foundry. Clarinet's going to be very similar to that. So this is a CLI tool that we can use to basically help write, test, and deploy our Clarity smart contracts. And the way that this Clarity folder is actually generated, if you were to start your own project from scratch, what you would do is within the terminal, you would say something. Let's say that we were in our main CrowdForge folder. Now we already have the Clarity folder in here, so we're not going to run this, but I would run Clarinet new, and then I would name whatever that folder is going to be. So in this case, this was created as a result of something like this, Clarinet new Clarity. And then that's going to create a new folder structure just like this that's got everything we need in here to set up a Clarity project. And so let's go through and look at a couple things in here. We'll start with this clarinet.toml file, because this is where we're going to handle a lot of the configuration for our project. Now if you were to use Clarinet, which by the way, if you go over here to Overview, you can see how to install it depending on what your operating system is. But you'll install that and it'll operate as a CLI tool. If you were to go into this clarinet.toml file, you can see a couple things here. A lot of this is generated for you automatically, but the template that we're using also does take care of a couple things for us as well. But you can see a couple of things in here like these project requirements. And so what we're basically telling our Clarinet project is that we need access to these contracts in order for our project to work. And you can see we've got 3 of them here. So these 2 project requirements are external contracts, and you can see based on the address here, these are actually mainnet contracts. So that's what this SM here is. But what we're saying here is we want to take this contract and this contract that are deployed on mainnet, and we want their functionality to be accessible within our local Clarinet project. And then this right here, this contracts.fundraising, this is a contract that we actually have here. And so what I would do then, if I wanted to create this contract, is let's say I ran that. Now I have my Clarity folder. What I would run here is Clarinet contract new, and then I'd call that fundraising. And that's how I'd create that contract there. And that's going to then do a couple of different things. That's going to create this file here. It would create a blank placeholder file. It's going to add it as a requirement here so that we know that we have to use it. And it's also going to create a stub test file for it here. And so these are kind of the different components of a Clarinet project. We've got the clarinet.toml file, when we create a contract, that'll create our contract and the tests for it. We also use Clarinet to run our tests. So if we go back to the docs here, you can see this Clarinet.js SDK. This is what we're going to be using for testing smart contracts. So when you write smart contracts in Clarity, you want to write your tests. You'll write your unit and integration tests using the Clarinet.js SDK, and your tests will be written in TypeScript. But that's what this is going to use right here. That's what this test file is using. And then the other thing that we'll check two more folders here. One is settings. So you can see that we've got a settings file for our DevNet, and this is going to configure a couple things, but it's got all of our accounts right here. Again, obviously don't actually use any of the accounts because the mnemonics are right here. These are meant only to be used in your local DevNet. You can see one of the cool things that we have here is we have SBTC balance. So if you're not familiar with SBTC, again, we can go to the docs, go over here to the Learn section, check out the section for SBTC so you can kind of see what it is, what it's all about. But SBTC, the short version is it's trustless two-way peg for Bitcoin. And so what this allows us to do is this setting right here makes it so that our DevNet wallets are pre-configured with both STX and SBTC tokens. So we can use our SBTC tokens within our application, mimicking just how we would if we were to deploy and actually use the real SBTC system. And that's part of why these are here too, is because in order to actually interact with SBTC, we need to use the SBTC contracts. So that's why we have those there. Next, we'll look at deployments. The final thing that you can do with Clarinet is you can deploy your smart contracts. So if we're over here in the Learn Clarinet section, we can go to contract deployment. And this is going to give you a bunch of information on how you can deploy your contracts to either DevNet, testnet, or mainnet. If we go back here, we can see we've got plans for DevNet and testnet. We're just going to be looking at the DevNet one right now, and you can see what this is going to be doing is it's got a Stacks node and a Bitcoin node. These are just actually going to be connected to our Hero platform instance. But you can see what we're doing here is we're telling Clarinet that it needs to publish all these different contracts. So we've got several that have to do with SBTC, so it's going to publish all those, and then we're also going to publish our fundraising contract here. So all of that is handled by Clarinet, and right now our Clarinet project is connected to the DevNet that we have running on the platform. And so you can see what happened here. The reason that these got deployed here in block 25 in our DevNet is because of this deployment plan. Because what we're basically doing is launching a mock blockchain here, and then we've got those being deployed right there. The last thing I'll cover real quick is if we're within our Clarinet project, we can also run Clarinet console, and this will actually deploy a similar mock localized version of our chain with our contracts deployed, and we can actually interact with these as well. This is going to be really similar to DevNet, although it's just a little bit less robust. You can't necessarily interact with the front end here, but you can with DevNet. But what you can do here is you can, via the command line, manually call into this contract and some of these functions, and so it's just another way that you can test your contracts right there. And then you can also do the same thing from within the platform itself. If I was to interact with DevNet here and go over to this contracts option, then I can actually just call these functions that I have directly from within the platform as well. So that is the Clarity side of things. And that kind of covers, if we're looking at our documentation here, that covers a lot of the stuff that we've got going here with Clarinet. There's a couple other things that you can do with Clarinet, like you can integrate with chain hooks. That's a little bit outside the scope of this tutorial, but we'll have other content coming on that. And the next thing that I want to look at is Stacks.js, because this is one of the other main ways that you're going to be building Stacks applications. So far we've looked at Clarity itself. That's the language that we're actually going to be writing our smart contracts in. And then we've looked at Clarinet, which is sort of the tool that's going to allow us to actually work with that. It's sort of you can think of it like our DevOps for our Clarity smart contract writing. And then the front end, most of this for the front end is just a typical Next application. It uses Chakra UI. It uses TanStack query for state management. And then I just want to look at a couple files that are going to let us look at a couple specifics for how we can interact with our front end using Stacks.js and specifically Stacks Connect. These are the two packages that you're really going to want to look at for interacting with the front end of your Stacks application. You can look at through all of these different examples here in the build section. And then if you go over to reference, then you can see here we've got our Stacks.js references for all these different packages. So like Stacks Connect is one we'll be looking at in just a second. You can see we've got all these different functions here. But Stacks Connect is, for the most part, going to be your main entry point to interacting with Clarity contracts deployed on the blockchain with the front end of your application. So if we go to our application right here, we actually have this running right now. This is built using this front end folder right here. And so we're going to look at a couple different things. The first thing I want you to notice is up here, we've got all of our DevNet wallets loaded. This is one of my favorite things about the templates, the platform templates, is that they have the DevNet wallets preloaded here, which makes it really, really simple to test. And there's a couple cool components in here that you can dig into kind of on your own time that allow this to happen. But if you go in here and you look at like this DevNet wallet context, what this is basically doing is it's preloading in these DevNet wallets so that the application is going to detect if our environment variable in our .env file is set to DevNet for our network. It's going to automatically pull in all of this stuff. And what's actually going to happen behind the scenes is normally if we were on testnet or mainnet and we wanted to, execute a transaction here, it would call up like our Leather wallet. So it would open up something within Stacks Connect that would call the wallet. We have to confirm that transaction in our wallet, and then it would get sent to the blockchain. The way this works when we're on DevNet within the template is because we have the mnemonics and everything hard-coded in here and just preloaded, we don't actually have to use the wallet at all in our testing on DevNet. It's just going to construct that transaction and send it off to our DevNet behind the scenes. And so we can look at how that works real quick here. What this right here is this is an ability to start a campaign. So I'm going to say I want to start a campaign for $500. I'm just going to hit this button, and that's actually going to initialize a transaction. So if we go back over here to our DevNet, right here we can see we just called this initialize campaign function. That's what we just did right here by setting that up. So there is a initialize campaign function in our contract. And what we did was we called this function using our front end right here. And so most of this functionality is going to happen in this donation modal file. So if we go look at this, there's a lot going on in this file, but the main thing I want to look at is let's see, this might be the wrong file. So this is how we donate, not how we initialize a campaign. But since we have our campaign initialized, if I was going to contribute, I could say I want to contribute SBTC. I'm going to donate $50 of SBTC, and you can see it's going to convert that on the fly for me. I'm going to donate that. That is also going to do the same thing that we just did when we initialized our campaign, and that's going to create a new transaction here. And there it is right there. There's that donate SBTC function that we just called. And so if we look in this donation modal, we've got we're kind of checking here if we're using SBTC or Stacks. And then you can see right here we've got a check. If this is a DevNet environment, it's going to run this execute contract call function, and it's going to pass in our transaction options and our DevNet wallet. If it's not on DevNet, then it's going to call this open contract call function. It's still going to pass in our transaction options. These transaction options are just generated from the form that we just used. But what are these two functions? Execute contract call, open contract call. If we go up here, let's see where we're pulling those in. So we've got open contract call and execute contract call. We're pulling these in from our contract utils file. If we go in and look at that, now we can see here that we've got a couple different things going on. So we're pulling in some functions from Stacks Connect, and then we're also pulling in a bunch of functions from Stacks transactions. And we're going to go check down here because we're building two functions within this utility file here. We're building this execute contract call function, and we're building this open contract call function. What this execute contract call function is going to do is it is going to take our DevNet wallet information directly, and it is going to call this make contract call function to generate a transaction. That make contract call comes from Stacks transactions. So this is where we're starting to actually use Stacks.js to construct our transaction. And then we're going to broadcast that. And we're able to pull in all of the transaction details because we have access to the DevNet private key directly right here, because again, we're hard coding those in. So this is why we don't have to actually use our wallet interface when we're doing this part, is because we're just broadcasting this directly because we have access to that private key from our DevNet account. And we're doing that using some of these functions that we're pulling in from Stacks transactions. If we go down here to the open contract call function creation, this is what we're going to be using if we're on a typical environment like testnet or mainnet and we need to use that wallet UI. We're going to generate all of our parameters here for our function itself, but then what we're going to do is we're going to use this request method, and that is being pulled from this Stacks Connect library. So if we go to our docs, the Stacks Connect library is how we're going to most of the time interact with our applications, because this is how we actually can connect with our wallet UI like Leather, Xverse, or whatever we're using. And so the Stacks Connect package is going to be something that you're going to want to dig into in the docs to see how that all works with broadcasting transactions and everything. But when we use this, when we call this request method from Stacks Connect, what that is going to do is basically trigger our wallet to actually then pop up the wallet UI so that we can finish the transaction on that. So that's kind of how the application is deciding between what it's going to do. So that's the sort of overview anatomy of a Stacks application. We've got our Clarinet project with our clarity and everything for the contract side of things. The front end is, you can kind of build it how you want. I do really like the way that the platform templates have set everything up. I think it's a really awesome, elegant way to do things, so I recommend you start with one of those. But how you execute on the front end is really up to you. The pieces that you're going to need to familiarize yourself with for Stacks specifically are these two libraries that we just looked at, Stacks Transactions and Stacks Connect. And there's a couple other ones that you may want to look at that are contained within Stacks.js itself. And so you can go to the overview here and you can kind of see all the different packages that are included in it. And you can go and check and see what all these things do in the reference section as well to look at all these different packages. And you can always ask the docs here, over here, right here, or you can hit Command K and you can type in your question. And what that'll do is search first, and then you can also, there's an LLM behind the scenes in Gitbook that you can ask questions here. But for this video, I really just wanted to stick to like a high-level overview of all the different components of a Stacks application so that you could kind of see how they all work together and how they're working in our platform template. In the coming videos, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using this Google Anti-Gravity tool, this AI-powered IDE, and we're actually going to add a new feature to our application. And so we're going to kind of look at in a little bit more detail how all these different pieces work together, because we're going to add a feature that's going to be using a clarity contract, it's going to be using the front end, and we're going to be writing a new test for it. So we're going to get to kind of see all those components and how they all work together. So I'll see you then.